を切り捨てても娘を守るため俺を倒す。幹部失格だな、食らえ。まさかバカな。
Though Thresh is my favourite champion, this is my favourite build. Kassadin retains a rather large portion of his assassin burst, trading some of it for enhanced mobility from a larger mana pool, physical damage and tankiness. By building this way, Kassadin becomes a resilient, hypermobile bruiser with a very respectable damage, burst and DPS towards late game. Upon finishing Muramana and core items, Kassadin becomes somewhat of a hypercarry, assassin, tanky, bruiser kind of thing. By having a ton of mana, which you get from tanky items like Iceborne Gauntlet and Frozen Hearts, you power up your Rift Walk through the mana ratio, and you give it way more fuel to not only use it a lot more, but also to access the power of a 4 stacked Rift Walk more commonly by having more mana to spare, and increasing the amount of mana your W will restore. If this sounds like the OP wet noodle Kassadin build, then allow me to remind you that your mana stacking will empower Muramana with bonus AD and a mana burning smack that applies on your auto attacks, your Q, and twice on your W, which is also an auto attack reset. Because of this, with a stacked Muramana and mana items to back it up, you will still have access to very threatening burst while building tanky. Now, the immediate pros and cons of this are: you're a tanky boy, meaning you have more reach and can dive teams better. You have more utility. More mana means you can spam spells much more, and by not prioritizing AP, you can save your E and Q to get the most of their utility rather than as necessary for burst. For example, your Q can be used to cancel channels like Katarina ult or TF ults, and your E can be saved for its slow. Better DPS through auto attacks with Muramana, meaning he can actually deal with bruisers and tanks a little better, though will definitely still struggle unless you build certain items for it. More versatile defensive options than traditional AP, late game hype beast, and because he doesn't wear Abaddon's fedora, you can tell he is no turbo virgin Kassadin, but the chaddest of Chad Kassadins. The cons, of course, are that he has worse early and mid game by far, although since Kassadin's early is pretty bad anyway, it's not like you're sacrificing much here. Regular builds lack sustain, which for a bruiser sucks a bit in top lane. Obviously less damage than full AP. When played mid, you take the slot where a potentially more damaging early mid game mage could have been played. Can be seriously trash in lane phase, weak against tanks, and counter building with items such as grievous wounds and percentage HP damage compromises your build. That's a long list of cons, but I think the weight of the pros are at least even. Having low impact early mid game is an enormous con, of course. That's why Kayle isn't played too often now, I think. And with the Sheen on Iceborne Gauntlet and Rod of Ages, his mid game isn't too atrocious. Just roaming with level 1 ult and E slow will prove very useful. An auto attack plus W reset with Sheen is pretty sizable in the early and mid game. The difference between AP Kassadin's late game and AD Kassadin's late game is that AD doesn't have to be too fearful of enemy peel. Though you should obviously be fairly cautious, you can often ult right past them, dodge skill shots easily, and tank a fair amount. Usually enough time to ult again onto a squishy target, or realise it was a bad idea and ult away. With Muramana being an on-hit as well, Ravenous Hunter works very well, giving pseudo lifesteal, making him even tankier. So let's get into this build I've been raving on about. Put simply, the core items and build order are a defensive starting item like Corrupting Potion, Cloth Armor with parts, Refillable Pot, or Doran Shield, or alternatively, fast tier start with Mana Crystal and Refillable, then get tier of the Goddess, followed up with Boots if you don't like magical ones, then Catalyst into Rod of Ages, into Sheen for Iceborne Gauntlet, or Negatron for Abyssal Mask depending on matchups, then taking Mercury Treads 80% of the time, and sometimes taking Ninja Tabi. Then the rest of the items are adaptive, depending on what defenses, utility, or sustain you need. Once you hit 600 mana on Tear of the Goddess, drop everything and finish Mana Moon so you can hit that huge Muramana power spike. Sometimes you might choose to skip Rod of Ages in order to get into mid-game a little smoother. Once again, to explain the build, all the mana from the items empower your Riftwalk's damage and availability, allowing you to more freely reach 4 stacks of Riftwalk, and also empowering Muramana for burst and DPS. The mana items double up as defensive options, making Kassadin very tanky, allowing him to deep dive into enemy teams to reach squishy carries more easily, and usually with enough health to get out, or ult on to the next target. I'll talk about more build options, especially this thing, in another video. The build I present in this video is fairly reliable, more versatile, and I know it works decently. But give me some time and I'll have a good conclusion on the Titanic Hydra build. There is a lot of knowledge and experience needed for the mid and late game when you get rolling. Let's start at the beginning with the lane phase. Kassadin's lane phases are already quite bad with AP, so going straight into tier is like hurling your early game off a cliff. Your main priority is to get tier, then start stacking it while securing whatever farm you can. Staying in lane for XP and tier stacks is more important in my mind than taking damage for farm against tricky opponents. This is why we start Corrupting Potion 90% of the time. Runes like Fleet Footwork and Biscuits will help you survive the lane as well. Also, be sure to use your E to help you last hit caster minions, and to wave clear when necessary to protect your turret platings. Use ult to wave clear for this purpose as well when you get it. Be very active with pinging missing enemies, as you likely won't be following them or roaming yourself, at least not until you hit 6. When you are able to shove the wave and roam quickly, do it. But as I said, the main thing is to protect your platings, stack your tier, and farm what you can, last hitting with Q where you can. If your opponent doesn't have too much sustain or power, you can aim to trade back with Q while drinking a Corrupting Potion to apply the extra burn. Make sure you anticipate their attacks and use Q to shield any magic damage they may deal to you. Picking the right runes for the job is incredibly important. Going double armor against AD champs is the difference between surviving lane and feeding or giving up all your farm. Likewise, taking magic resistance against someone like Vlad is ridiculously important as well. Kassadin's passive is good, but not good enough to work on its own. If you haven't fed, good job, you're doing well. Mid-game is where roams and skirmishes become more common, and turret platings are falling or heavily contested. In an ideal world, you're in a bro lane with the enemy and are just farming away for like 30 minutes. That's probably not happening. You have to make a choice in the early game after you finish tier, and that's whether you can get away with building Rod of Ages or not. It's an incredible item in terms of gold efficiency, and Kassadin benefits a lot from all of the stats. If your team comp has a strong enough early and mid game, then you may be able to get away with building Rod of Ages and can build it straight after tier. However, if you're too late game, or your laners are already hard feeding and you aren't being fed by your opponent, then you may have to skip it, rush your Iceborne, and start making plays with Sheen and Riftwalk. It's not going to be as damaging as Luden's Kassadin, but you'll certainly be useful. Iceborne still gives Riftwalk damage, so it isn't bad at all, and having the CDR before you hit level 16 makes your ultimate a lot less bad. If you're top lane and not under pressure yourself, even if bot is, you can probably go for Rod of Ages and just focus on becoming a hyper carry. That said, if you're up against Darius, Renekton or Fiora, those kind of people, then perhaps you need an early Glacial before Rod of Ages, or just skip Rod of Ages entirely. For most of mid-game proceeding to late game, you'll be choosing defensive items to match the enemy team. Then suddenly, you have Muramana. If the enemy is ahead, things may seem lost, but this power spike can shut down most carries and even do significant damage to a fed bruiser or juggernaut with relative safety. If the fed enemy is an AD carry, you can likely still burst them down very quickly. It becomes more difficult if they have a support or bloodthirster with them, but it is likely possible, and this is where you must learn to Riftwalk correctly. Put simply, you need to know how many Riftwalks you need to reach your opponent, including any peel or dashes they may have, and weigh that against how able you are to stack your Riftwalk before approaching. For example, an enemy Ezreal with Yuumi W and Arthur escapes will demand you start approaching from 0 stacks of Riftwalk. This way you can spam Riftwalk and reach him as soon as possible, with the lowest mana costs possible. If it's just a Jhin over a wall, and they have no vision of you, you may be able to stack your Riftwalk behind that wall before jumping over to guarantee a ton of damage. Your W will replenish the mana, so don't feel too bad about spending so much in such a situation. Of course, if you tried to pre-stack your Rift Walk against that aforementioned Ezreal, you'll run out of mana and be stuck on 4 stacks just as Ezreal dashes away and Yumi's R hits you, and now you'll have no mana to escape or chase, and no W targets to give for that 20% maximum mana restore. 20%? What's that in the script? It's way more than that. These examples are both hypothetical and exaggerated, but it's such a simple thing that must be stressed. Without a huge amount of AP, you should make up for the missing damage with Rift Walk stacks. Since you have such a heavy investment in mana, you should use it to the best of your ability. Experience is key, so try and see how many stacks you can get away with when certain situations arise. Just be careful the next time you play a standard Kassadin build with less mana and tankiness. Now if you're playing very Rift Walk heavy, it's actually a good idea to go for Seraph's Embrace instead of Muramana. If you really need the AoE damage, Seraph's Embrace will give you much more mana to spend because of the 25% mana cost reductions. Not only that, but having AP to empower Rift Walk does actually scale better than having mana, and of course having both whilst being tanky means that you can absolutely mana fart all over them. Just mana diarrhea just everywhere. Aside from that, if it isn't already obvious, Kassadin is making up for what he lacks in damage with extreme, unmatched mobility. If only with a pseudo cooldown with the 800 mana cost 4 stacks of Rift Walk, accessible when you hit someone with W. When you're able to maintain 4 stack Rift Walk and reset off enemies, you become a reset assassin by just having huge Rift Walk and Muramana damage. Now I think that more skeptical of you are wondering, does this build even work? If only we had some kind of meme-filled montage to demonstrate.
Hey, what just?
Need backup. Roger that.
Yeah, boy.
Enemy spotted.
蹴るぞ。
お前さえ娘よ、お前さえ生まれていなければ、お前は私を本気で怒らせた。
Thanks for watching. I'd like to do more of this one and I hope I did decent with it. Let me know what you think. As mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk about Titanic Hydra on Kassadin in another video, of which there will be 3, including this one. A 3-part guide to AD Kassadin, wowee! I've also previously promised the full AD Thresh guide, so let me know which one you want to see first, and what other kind of things you'd like to see from the channel. If you haven't seen the Thresh top guide, it will be suggested in the end screen. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.